We are going to start this session starting from 1:30.
지금부터 2022
Now
한반도
we are going to
국제평화
start
포럼의
the
5-2 세션을
session
시작하도록
5.2.
하겠습니다. 5-2 세션은
The
남북
session
그린대
5.2
당트
is
비전과
North
과제라는
and South
주제로
Korea's Korean
발제와
Détente
패널 토크가
vision
진행됩니다.
and challenges.
이번 5-2
This
세션의
session will be
자장은
moderated
최승로
by
자유기업원
President
원장님께서
Choi Seung-no,
맡아주시겠습니다.
who is
그럼
head of
자장님을
the
모시도록
Center for the
하겠습니다.
Free Enterprise. Please welcome Mr. Moderator.
네, 안녕하십니까. 오늘 좌장 맡은 자유기업원 원장
Hi, I'm Choi Seung-no, who
인사드립니다.
is the president for the Center for the Free Enterprise, and I'm the moderator for you today.
이번 3일에 걸쳐 진행되는 이번 포럼 아주
And
의미가
we
있습니다.
have the 3-day-long KGFP, and we have lots of agenda, and we were enjoying lots of wonderful presentation and discussion. In this session, we're going to talk about the Green Détente, the vision and challenge. This is a significant topic, and this will bring about significant outcome to our society, and I am pinning high expectation. We have two presenters and the three panel discussants. So we are going to have a wonderful session
오늘
today.
행사는 동시 통역으로
Today we are
진행되고
providing
있습니다.
simultaneous
그래서
interpretation
한국어는 3번
for Korean channel number 3, and for English, please use channel number 4.
그리고 또 행사를 동시에 온라인으로 진행을
And also, you can watch this event online. For those who are joining online and during the Q&A session, you can click the link to ask a question.
바로 질문이 있으시면
Whenever you have a question, please click on the question link and you can ask a question. You can write down your question, and I'm going to collect all those questions so that it can be covered during the Q&A session. This is online live streamed on YouTube.
먼저 참석자를 먼저
First of all, I would like to introduce who are gathered here today. I would like to introduce the presenters today.
이우균 고려대학교
Professor Lee Woo-gyun, professor of the Korea University. Please welcome him with big hands.
네, 오늘 두 번째 발표하신
Next, we have Mr. Mukesh Kimire, Assistant Director from Nepal.
진흥센터 부원장이십니다.
Please welcome him with big hands.
세 분의 토론자
For the panel discussion,
IBK
we have Executive Vice President Cho Bong-hyun from the IBK Economic Research Institute.
토론자 최강석 넷째로
We have Secretary General Choi Gang-seo, who is working for the Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation.
이수정 산업
Also, we have Associate Research Fellow Kim Soo-jung from the Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade. And we have the wonderful presenters and the discussants who are the experts in the topic. Without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Lee Woo-gyun for the first presentation. So please come to the stage.
여기 청중께서는 옆에 있는 스크린을 보시면서
And you can look at the screen.
발표를 들으시고 또 여기 계신 분들 앞에 모니터가 있으니까
And there is a monitor, so you can refer to the monitor. Professor Lee, now the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Thank you very much.
방금 소개받은 고려대학교 환경
My name is Lee Woo-gyun from Korea University.
우선 이러한 소중한
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me in this wonderful occasion.
오늘 저는
Today,
한반도 기후 환경 분야
I'd like to talk about the cooperation strategy in the environment and climate sector on the Korean Peninsula. And the presentation today I will give you is related to the climate regime, which is a project conducted by the Ministry of the Environment. And based on that project, I would like to make a presentation. And Dr. Hyuna Choi and Dr. Chul-hee Lim from Kookmin University and Dr. Chul-ho Song also participated in this project. So I would like to recognize them and acknowledge them for the wonderful work during the presentation.
예, 다 아시는 것처럼
As you are well aware of,
남한과 북한은
South Korea and North Korea have similar environment, but at the same time, there are different environment.
현상들이 나타나고 상이한 경험을 하고 있습니다.
and we are experiencing
다만은
different things.
기후 변화 측면에서 보면
On
요즘
South
다
Korea,
아시는 것처럼
as
요즘 저희가
for the climate change, we directly experience the phenomenon. For example, there are natural disasters caused by the unusual weather and climate. For example, there was a flood several days ago in Seoul, and yesterday and today we are undergoing a long
이런 것을
rainy season, which is almost like monsoon.
아주 그
And due to these
사회적으로
phenomena,
드러나고 있진 않지만
even though it
사실은
is invisible in the
농업
society,
생산성의 저하가 매우 심각합니다.
we are experiencing very serious issue in agricultural productivity, such as the insect and the slow growth of crops, and some crops are dying.
가뭄으로 인한
And during the
그리고 올해처럼
spring season, we experienced a
때이른
drought.
폭염과
And this
또
year
때이른
there was
장마,
early
이거를
scorching
거론해서
heat
봄철을
and
잡는
early
감자
monsoon
추수들이
and typhoon
매우
season.
심각하게
As a result, the spring crops were affected hugely.
우리 대한민국
And
에서 일어나고
these
있고요.
are currently taking place
환경
in South
문제로는 뭐
Korea.
아시는 것처럼
And let me move on
개발과
to the
도시화가
environmental issue.
큰 틀로는
These issues
10%
are caused by development and urbanization. In the 10%, to be specific, in 17% of land area, 92% of population are living. And in the climate change responses, we have the burden of carbon neutrality. And today I would like to focus on the forestry.
그 황폐화된 것을 복구한 아주 우수한
And when it comes to the forestry, we have a success story of the recovery of the forest.
잘 관리
And it is now well grown and we are in the mature stage. However, the current issue is how we can manage this.
북한 또한 이상
And in
기후의
North
그
Korea,
큰 변화를
of
겪고
course, there
있습니다.
are unusual weather patterns due to the climate change. In the 1960s and 70s, we also experienced the landslide, flood, and drought. North Korea is now undergoing the same phenomenon. And even though it is not clearly visible in South Korea, in North Korea, the lowering of the agricultural productivity is very visible. And this is a serious issue. And it is the same for the water shortage.
이것이 한국 그 남한의
And when it comes to the environment,
도시화 집중이
in South Korea, we are experiencing the centralization and urbanization, but in North Korea,
도 관리가 제대로 되지 않다.
they are lacking the land management system and environment management system. And
기후 변화, 탄소 중립, 여러 가지 환경 이슈를
many environmental issues,
좀 삼고
including carbon emissions, should be serving as an opportunity for North Korea for development.
남한의 그 성공 사례처럼
And
북한의
as
문제가
we succeeded,
필요가 있습니다.
North Korea also needs to recover its damaged forest.
기후 변화 관련된
So on the Korean Peninsula, when it comes to the climate change, both North and South Korea's
그 해결해야 될 것은
need to resolve the issues related to water, food, and energy. I believe this is a big task for us. If we are successfully dealing with these problems, then we can respond well to the climate change. Then the development of the Korean Peninsula will go beyond the border of the Korean Peninsula. I believe it can be extended to the other area
의 특징을 살려서
on the earth. And when it comes to the environment, I would like to make a suggestion.
그다음에 해양
The land, air, and maritime, there are a circulation system.
했을 때
So if we are successful in managing those circulation,
비슷한 조건을 가진 중위도에서
then in other countries located in the same hemisphere, they will learn lessons from us. And internationally,
에서 관심을 받고 있습니다.
both North Korea and South Korea are receiving attention in many aspects. So I believe we can play a leading role once we successfully manage this problem. And South Korea successfully recovered its damaged forestry. So I believe North Korea also can recover the forest successfully. Despite the difficulties, North Korea continued its effort and participation in the international environmental activities. For example, in 2017, it joined the IUCN, and in the same year, it also joined the CTCN, and it also requested the technological transfer for the life cycle assessment. And in 2018, it became the 170th member of the Ramsar Convention, and it also joined the EAAFP. And in 2019, it designated the NDA for GCF. And in 2021, it also submitted the VNR for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And North Korea is also very active in the activities of COP. These photos have been taken in 2019 at COP25. So there was a meeting between North Korea, ISA, and C4, and we discussed the application of the land management system, but due to the COVID-19, we were not able to implement this land degradation system. Already, there was a proposal at UNFCCC, and UNFCCC actively reviewed this proposal. And as I mentioned before, CIPHER was the main operating organization. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was not able to be implemented. And as I mentioned before, in 2019, GCF approved the readiness proposal for the DPRK. And inside the UNFCCC, the CTCN membership was also approved. So North Korea is very active. However, due to the pandemic, the activities have been stopped. As I mentioned before, water, energy, and food should be managed well and supplied well. In particular, this should be connected to the circulation among land, air, and maritime. This is very important task. And I'd like to look into the strategy. Currently, the forest is damaged in North Korea. And then how we can restore the forest. First, we need to look into the needs of North Korea. First, the cause of deforestation is energy and food. Due to the agricultural issues, the forest is damaged. So once we restore the forest, we also need to provide energy and food. So first, we need to provide the supply service. And at the same time, we also need to provide the supporting or modulating system. Then internationally, when we do the reforestation or cooperation with DPRK, how can we do that? I believe that technology should be led by South Korea, and this restoration should be conducted internationally. That is the secret for the success. For example, to restore the forest, there should be a budget. The budget can be provided from South Korea, and technology can be provided from the international society. And then there might be chaos. And depending on the characteristics of the organization or nature of the organization, there might be internal controversy in North Korea. And our next generation also needs to participate in the project. But if the technology is originated from the international society, then DPRK needs to rely on the international society. However, in South Korea, we have many advanced technologies and there are many experienced people. So, based on the technology, we can work on the cooperation between the DPRK and RK, and international society can work for the complementary role. For example, we can select the crops and we can also select the method for reforestation. On the left side, there is South Korea. On the right side, there is North Korea. And between South and North Koreas, we can have a cooperation and we can also use the international organizations. And at the same time, it is important that we identify the joint projects. Now, let me give you an example. Previously, I mentioned that stable supply of food, energy, and water should be ensured. In North Korea, food and energy, in particular, the woods are not enough. But North Korea is very interested in the renewable energy, in particular the photovoltaic energy. So, if we provide those technologies, it is likely to be successful. And for water supply, we can pump the water, and with the water, we can also provide the food. So, without the energy, we cannot provide any other goods necessary for livelihood. So we need to first provide energy, and in the cooperation between the two Koreas and cooperation with the international society, we need to implement this project. In Korea, 30% is forest, and in North Korea, 70% of the land is a forest. So, I believe that will serve as a basis for green détente. Then let's take a look at the technology. In the past, everything was collected on land and it has been monitored on land. However, as you know, recently there were development of the satellite technologies, and we have our land satellite, land monitoring satellite, climate monitoring satellite, and there will be more satellites. So if we put politics aside, then these will be used in green détente. And if we combine this with ICT technology we have in South Korea, then we can apply this to green détente on the Korean Peninsula, and it can be extended to the international society, and I believe it can also serve as an opportunity for Korea to work on green détente in the world. Korea is located here at 38 degree. This is middle latitude. And in this belt, there are similar climates. For example, it is a temperate area, and water is very important in this area. And in particular, 50% of global population are habitating in this area. And it is very wide area because it is a center of the globe. So in many aspects, it is very important, but it is not getting enough attention from the international society. First, it is because of the Europe-centric economy. So as a buffer zone, there should be a role that we can play, but it is not getting enough attention. And stable supply of water is very important in mid-latitude region, and Korea can play a leading role. So that should take place on the Korean Peninsula. And as I mentioned before, I will focus on forest. Another point I would like to make is that in relation to the DPRK, environmental management and in reforestation, what should be the focus? Until now, we missed one thing. in water management, environment management, energy management, food management, and forest management, we need to have a wide perspective. At least it should be at the
여러분이 다 아시는 것처럼
watershed level.
환경 관리,
However, in reality,
생산 체계는 다 필지 단위로 되어 있습니다.
the land management and food production are based on the lots.
도시형 환경 관리라고 볼 수 있습니다.
So it can be seen as an urban
그
type
농촌에도 적용.
management system, and it is applied to the farming lands.
푸르른 것 같지만 사실은
So we think that farming lands are green. However, actually it is separated and divided. So I believe in North Korea, the watershed level restoration is very important. And we can get enough information through satellites. So when we do restoration in North Korea, even though they have the lot system, however, the system will be very loose. So it may be easier for the DPRK to implement this watershed level restoration.
관리 체계를 빨리 갖추고
So now there should be the watershed level management system as soon as possible. Then North Korea and South Korea can reach a consensus, and we can also apply the watershed level management system.
정주지 주민까지 다 포함한
And it should also include the people and habitats. And
기반 해법에서도
nature-based solution
단위의 환경 관리는 매우 필수적으로 되어 있습니다.
is very important nowadays, and this watershed management system is a part of the nature-based management system.
좋은 영향을 미칠 수가
And it can also give a positive influence to the international carbon management.
북한이
Until now, I reviewed
적극적으로 참여하고
the current environmental situation, and I said that North Korea is very active in the international society.
현재 좀그 여러 가지 사정
But due to many reasons, currently it has been stopped.
협력이 필요하고
And on the Korean Peninsula, we need to work on the cooperation for climate and environment. And I have 5 proposals. First, we need to connect the energy and forest to have a joint project between the two Koreas. Second, there should be the technological cooperation project, and the satellites we own should be utilized, and there should be environment cooperation model,
토지 및 유역형
and region-based and watershed-based climate and environment cooperation model should be created. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Professor Lee, thank you very much for the presentation.
Now let's move on to the second presentation.
두 번째 발표를 마친
The second presentation is Mr. Mukeshi Kimura.
주제가 지속 가능
His topic is
온실가스 감축 목표 달성
the green and climate finance and the development cooperation for climate change.
관한 연구입니다. 네, 발표 준비되셨으면
If you're ready, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Respected chair and moderator of the session, and all the respected dignitaries in the dais, and all the participants, ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, good afternoon, annyeonghaseyo, namaste to all of you. I am Mukesh from Nepal, so which is the country lying between two big countries, India and China, and it's the country of the highest peak in the world, Mount Everest, and the birthplace of the Gautam Buddha. So I would like to welcome you all in this presentation. So first of all, I would like to thank to the organizer, Ministry of Unification, and Net Zero Climate 2050 Climate Foundation and Korean University for providing me this opportunity. So of course, I am not the expert on these North and South Korea issues, but what I would like to bring the issues related to the global climate financing, green climate financing, how the world is working on this area, and how this both the Korean governments can work together in the area of the green climate financing, that I would like to talk about briefly. So I'll be basically focusing on these four topics. One is the global climate funding mechanisms. What are the different global climate funding mechanisms? And how the funds are being available globally. Of course, that can be tapped by especially the North Korean government. And I would like to bring the small case because we have the very long relationship with the South Korea, with the Nepal. So how the development cooperation we are tapping with the South Korea, how we are getting the developing countries like Nepal is benefiting from the global cooperation from the South Korea. That could be the example to the North Korea as well. And finally, I would like to bring some of these potential opportunities in the area of this green detent that is being discussed today. So on these four topics, so let me first bring with this global climate funds architectures. So if you, in the figure, you can see the very complex figure, but the summary is there are basically 5 different mechanisms if you see the globally. So one is this bilateral, because every country they have these bilateral supporting mechanisms. Like in European countries, they have their own mechanisms. US, they have own mechanisms. So Korea, South Korea, they have their own mechanisms. So this bilateral funding mechanism is one window. And second one is this multilateral mechanisms. There are many development banks, especially World Bank, ADB, and other development banks. So they are supporting to the other countries. So this is another multilateral supporting windows. And third one is this, especially related to this climate financial mechanisms. So through the UNFCCC mechanisms, so they have this, again, 2 windows. So UNFCCC mechanism and non-UNFCCC mechanism. So where we can see the role of this, like Green Climate Fund and other supporting such UN agencies on this one. And besides this also, we also have the different regional and the national funds in the area of the climate funds. So whether we can tap those opportunities. And the most important player in terms of the investment also. So besides the government, we have this private sector also. So these are the 5 different key mechanisms in the area of this global climate fund architecture. So if we see the funds, what are the different funds available in the green financing? So one and very important one is this Green Climate Fund. As we all know, this Green Climate Fund is located in South Korea. So I think through this UNFCCC mechanism that has been set up in South Korea. So the many developing countries like Nepal and other countries, so we are getting access of those funds. I think when we talk about this green detent or this green climate financing, so this is one of the very important funds that we can access on this green climate fund. So again, there are 2 different mechanisms. One is on this mitigation areas, we have the different funds available. And on the adaptation area also, we have the different funds available, so globally. And especially in the area of the forestry and this RED, so we have the different funds also. So my point here is basically we have this large number of these global climate funds in the area of this climate mitigation, climate adaptations. So we should be very proactive to attract those funds. And if we see the global climate finance overview, so annually in every year, so around more than 600 million of this 600 billion of the US funds, means those amounts have been available annually. So we can see these are the different, so these are the different, you can see these different sources where these funds comes from. And also this, we can see where these funds are being used or what are the instruments, like in the grants, in the form of the grants, in the form of the loan, in the form of the project equity, so in the form of the balance sheet financing. So we can see different funding mechanisms also. So at the end, we can see where this, in which areas we are spending those funds, mostly in the mitigation area and some in this adaptation area also. So, and also see if we see the sector, where these funds have been utilized. So mostly they are being utilized in the form of this, in the area of the energy sector mostly. And also for some of the funds have been utilized in the transportation sector. So the point here is basically, if we see globally, there are different funds, there are the different sources, especially the private sectors are more investing now. And they are using these funds especially for this, mainly for the mitigation purpose. And mostly the fund is being used in the energy sector. So if we talk about these global funds and this cooperation between the North Korea and South Korea, especially the North Korea can absorb those funds. So let me go with the next point. So if we see the trend, how these trends have been, how the global funds trends have been utilized. So even the trend is very positive. It's going increasing. We can see from 2011-12 to 2019-20. We can see that this graph, but this is not sufficient. Especially if we talk about this Paris Agreement on this limiting this 1.5 degrees centigrade temperature. So we need lots of more, even more amount. So we need around more than 4.35 trillion USD by 2030. So this is the funds required globally. Even the world is trying best, and the many countries are generous to provide the funds in the climate areas. Still, these funds are not sufficient. So if we see this financing mix, where these funds have been utilized so far, so mainly they are being mainly used for this grants. Mainly the debt portion and the equity portion is very high. Grant is very small. Mainly grant is being used for these developing countries and least developed countries. And the area is especially this, even now, if we talk about this energy side, the mitigation area is dominating to the adaptation area. Even the funds like Green Climate Fund, they are trying to push some more projects on the adaptation side. But in reality, still this mitigation side is dominating. And we can see, because the presentation from earlier professor also we have already seen. So there are linkages between the sustainable development and NDC targets with the global climate funds. So all these funds, all these development agendas have been interlinked. So if we support in one of the sustainable development areas, of course there will be the positive environment in other areas also. So I think today I'm mainly focusing on the energy perspectives, energy side. So if we see in terms of the figures, so like we can see here, we can see different number of projects, like in the area of this energy access, already these 48 projects have been in implementations with this 550 million USD. And in terms of the clean technology, because earlier professor also mentioned about the role of the importance of this technology. So where we can see the different projects have already been in implementation in 133 number of projects with the fund of the 4.8 billion USD. So, but these funds are still not sufficient, but now the global support in the climate area is now basically evolving. So let me quickly share about this Green Climate Fund, because this is the largest fund that is available globally now. So from the GCF, we have all total more than 200 projects have already been approved. With this, they have the very positive environment contribution to the environment. It will save 2.1 billion of the carbon dioxide, and it will support to the 641 million globally. And already the 10.8 billion USD investment from GCF have been already announced. And the total 161 projects have been under implementations. From the GCF, we all know they have this decision-making body, which we call this board. So they have already conducted 33 board meetings. So in terms of these funding windows, 65% of the funding are related to the public sector. They are mainly supporting to the public sector. And they are supporting to the private sector as well. So in terms of this adaptation and mitigation, still the mitigation portion is still high. So before coming to Korea, actually I was working with one of the project in the Green Climate Fund. So that was been approved by the Green Climate Fund. That was around 50 million USD. So, like we already saw from the professor, especially in the North Korea and what are the activities, GCF activities in both Korea, North Korea and South Korea. Of course, South Korea is one of the donors now to the GCF. Even they are supporting, they are hosting their office in the South Korea itself. So they have the very good relationships with the GCF. So in terms of the contribution, they have already contributed more than 200 million USD in 2020 itself. But if we see the activity related to North Korea, so I only found there is one readiness proposal. The amount is also not so high, only 752,000 only. But that has been still actually not in fully functional. Means there are some issues, political issues. So, but I think the main point here is, of course, this GCF is supporting globally for these climate areas. So I think North Korea is still quite behind to attract or to get those kind of funds. Of course, there are some political issues, but that needs to be resolved as soon as possible and should be able to access these funds. So of course, from the South Korea, because now the South Korea is basically a kind of the global leader in, especially not only in the technology, but also support to other countries also. So there are especially the two different mechanisms from the South Korea that North Korea can attract this global cooperation fund from the South Korea as well. Like we are doing also the same. So especially one mechanism is related to this with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They will be supporting through this KOICA mechanism. And another is this Korea Exim Bank. So on this window, Korea, we can attract, more investment funds. So I think from the Korea side, so they are supporting on this bilateral side and on the multilateral sides. So there are different grants, different loans available. But I could not see the many projects related to this global cooperation between the North Korea and South Korea. Of course, there are some few projects related to the humanitarian aid, but in terms of the global cooperation, how South Korea is supporting to other countries, I think that can be one of the example to the support to the North Korea as well. So even if we see the South Korea's strategic development cooperation, is still just in 2022 only, the Korea has this 4 to 5 trillion amount of the budget available for this ODA. And they have these 44 implementing agencies, in total more than 1,700 projects that South Korea is supporting to globally. And there are 88 countries who are receiving support from the South Korea. So I think this is the very good opportunity to all of the developing countries also. Not only with this fund, because the South Korea, they are coming up with the different windows also. We can see the different ODA, like inclusive ODA, the co-purpose ODA, innovative ODA. So where we can have lots of opportunity to work together with the South Korea to get this kind of this ODA. So if we see the figure of the South Korea ODA, so in terms of this share, especially this, we can see mainly this is related to this bilateral aid is quite more important for the South Korea also. So they're providing mainly the bilateral aids. They're providing only few percent is a multilateral ODA. And in terms of these loans, they have only 36.3%. And the South Korea is basically supporting developing countries in the area through the grants. So we can see lots of the grants from the South Korea that is being benefited by the different developing countries. So South Korea have already identified 25 countries as a strategic development priority countries. So Nepal is one of the countries that is highly recognized by the South Korea government, and we are getting those funds. So especially on this, related to this climate compatible development, so there are 4 different areas that has been identified. One is on the low carbon growth, and second one is the water and disaster management, and third one is this climate smart agriculture, and fourth is this sustainable waste management. So if we see this, how Korea and Nepal are collaborating from very beginning, So that has been, the relationship has been established in 1974 bilaterally. So then after 1974 to 2007, the Korean embassy was established in Nepal in 1974. And Nepal embassy has been established in only 2007. And then the bilateral mechanism have been initiated in 2001. And there is one special relationship between these countries, this cultural agreement. We also have the cultural agreements between these countries, where we can have this linkage between culture, arts, sports, education, youth and tourism sector. And from 2007, okay, sir. In 2007, we have this special agreement with these employment permit systems. In 2014, we have this grant aggregate type of the framework agreement. So now the support has been, we are getting this support very generously from the South Korea. So we'd like to thank to the South Korea government as well. So basically, the South Korea government is supporting in these 4 areas to Nepal: water management and health hygiene, education, regional development, and energy sector. So in terms of this SDG areas, there are 4 SDG areas that is we are getting support from South Korea. One is this SDG 3, SDG 2, SDG 4, and SDG 7. So these are the numbers that have been supported from both sides, from the Korea side and Nepal side. So I don't want to go to explain the detail on the numbers. You can see that there are lots of cooperation support between both the countries. So there are a few ongoing projects. One is this, there is one big hydropower. This 216 megawatt of the hydropower is being developed by the Korean government and Korean financing sector. So in terms of energy also, there are lots of cooperation between these countries. So these are the different windows that have been available with the South Korea government: grants, loans, this FDI, and the private sector. And Korea is supporting through most of the windows. Still, these soft loans and these technical experts, these areas are still lacking. I think we need to work on this area as well. So let me quickly share about this NDC thing that has already been discussed earlier also, because the South Korea's NDCs are mainly related to the mitigations. There are some unconditional targets. In North Korea, they have these adaptations things that needs to be worked out, because they have these conditional targets. From this also we can see that North Korea should have to work together with the international communities, international cooperation to meet these targets also. So let me skip this slide. Yeah, that we already discussed in the earlier presentation as well. Even though North Korea is trying to getting some of the funds, some of the support. So like we can see the different dates, like North Korea has ratified this Kyoto Protocol in 2005, and Paris Agreement is in 2016. So now North Korea is also the part of this global, global climate arena. So I think it's still, there are few projects, they are very small amount. But I think North Korea should have to work more on the large projects. Yeah. So as I already mentioned, there is only some humanitarian assistance to North Korea from the South Korea. But the main development related works, main development support has still not been utilized by the North Korea. So through this green Détente, I think that has already been, I think we all know these things, these different approaches and stages. So I think North Korea should have to be able to fully utilize these green Détente initiatives, especially on the area of this promoting the renewable energy in terms of the energy side. So this is probably my last slide. So I want to basically conclude with these 5 points. One is this: to meet this NDC and the SDG targets, of course, like developing countries like North Korea and other countries like us, we cannot fulfill all these SDG targets, NDC targets, without support from the global cooperation. So global cooperation is needed. And second, in terms of this, both South and North Korea's NDC targets are related to this energy sector. Because if we see both the NDC targets, both countries' NDC are related to energy side. So I think the climate mitigation projects for the South Korea and the climate adaptation projects for the North Korea will help in achieving these NDC targets. And third one is the Korean Peninsula. It basically is continuously observing some climate-related disasters. So I think climate impacts are not specific to the geographical boundaries. So I think both the Koreans should cooperate on through this cooperation mechanism like this, so green detente. And fourth point is basically South Korea's cooperation mechanism like ODA. We already discussed about the ODA. So and ODA and other technical support windows have not been fully utilized by the North Korea. So I think that could be the opportunity for North Korea to attack those South Korea's ODA. And the last one is this global climate funds, such as Green Climate Fund, this CTF, Clean Technology Fund. Adaptation Fund will facilitate for developing countries, because for developing countries there are lots of opportunities. So I think with these funds, if we can attack those funds, we can have some kind of this meeting these global targets by the countries with this kind of these funds. So with this, so I would like to thank once again to the organizer and all the participants by listening me. So if there are any issues, then of course we can discuss at the end. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
김미래 부원장님께서 상호협력
So mutual cooperation was emphasized, and cooperative relations and its way for cooperation was emphasized. And
현실적으로 실정
he also provided 5 practical suggestions, and based on these 2 presentations, there will be panel discussions from 3 panelists. First, we will turn to Executive Vice President Cho Bong-hyun of IBK Economy Research Institute.
네, 안녕하십니까. IBK 기업은행의 조봉련입니다.
Good afternoon. I am Cho Bong-hyun from IBK. Thank you very much for the good presentation.
협력과 기금의 중요성.
He talked about the importance of the international cooperation and international funds.
좀더 그 발표 내용에 대해서 구체적으로 말씀을 드리기보다
And rather than talking about the specific details, I will tell you about my opinion about the Green Détente itself.
지금 기후 변화 환경 대응은 세계적
Climate change and climate action is an international issue. This is a must we should do for the better future of the society and the world. This is not a matter of choice. This is a must.
그러면 그린 데탕트가 한반도 측면에서 어떤 의미를 가지고
And what is the implication of the Green Détente to Korean Peninsula?
북핵 문제 해결하는
I would say Green Détente can be
견인하는
helpful
중요한 촉매제라고
in resolving the North Korean nuclear issue.
전제가 돼야 그다음에 뭐 해야 되는
And as you know, North Korean nuclear issue can be resolved only when we have some foundation for the engagement and interaction. Once we have the Green Détente, it can be really good and it can lay the foundation for the resolution of the North Korea's nuclear
두
issue.
번째는 지금 남북 관계 많이 박혀 있는데 이 남북 관계
Currently, we have the deadlock in inter-Korean relations, and Green Détente can be one of the good mechanisms to resolve and to have a better inter-Korean relations. In the past, when we have the inter-Korean cooperation, they were on and off. However, the Green Détente should be the sustainable development cooperation project regardless of the situation and the politics. That is why we should be working on it really hard. Conditions are not required. We should do it. This is something that we should do. We should not be waiting for some conditions are met. So the Green Détente vision is really meaningful to us.
토론에 들어가면 두 가지 정도 말씀을 드리겠습니다.
And let me point out 2 things. First,
북한이 과연 이런 기후 변화와 관련돼 가지고
and regarding the climate change,
고민을 하고 있는 건지
what North Korea has in mind is my question.
국제 기구가 나서 가지고
Probably international organizations should do something to encourage North Korea to do something.
어떻게 해야 될 것인가?
Then what is the task given to the South Korean government?
아시다시피 북한이 작년도
And as you know,
2030
last year,
SDG에 관한 자발적 국가 검토 보고서
and they submitted the VNR for the 2030 climate change.
여기의 내용을 보면
And when you take a look at the voluntary report, they came up with the greenhouse gas reduction plan. By 2030, they're going to reduce by the 6.4% of the greenhouse gas. And they have the green growth plan on their own. And they have the power generation goal. And they are going to use the hydropower generation rather than coal-fired powered plants. And they said they are going to modernize the facilities for the power generation. By 2044, they are going to use 5 million megawatt of the renewable energy sources, and wind is accounting for 15% of those 5 million. And they also talk about the eco-friendly energy, environmental protection in their report. And they are going to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And their economy will be turned into more energy efficient economy. They talk about the zero emission and eco-friendly technology. They also talk about the energy efficiency. North Korea came up with that kind of plan in their VNR. However, North Korea cannot do it alone, which means international organizations and the institute should play a big role. And there are lots of international organizations supporting the developing countries. And those organizations should pay keen attention to North Korea. GCF, as an example, as you said, can be one of the key examples. GCF is providing funds to Vietnam, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, and some of the African countries. They have various programs, and many of the countries are receiving funds and receiving benefits. And probably North Korea can be one of them, getting some more benefit from the GCF. And there is a UNDP. And from the UNDP, there should be more active engagement with North Korea. World Bank has various programs, and why not North Korea? For example, they provided some help to the Vietnam for the clean energy, and they provided help to Bangladesh. And from the agricultural sector, from the UN, there have been many programs provided to developing countries, so those mechanisms should be fully utilized in North Korea. From South Korean government, green détente is nothing new. That has been suggested from the Lee Myung-bak administration and Park Geun-hye administration. Many people talked about the inter-Korean cooperation for the environmental issue for North Korea. We had some outcome, but the outcome was not sufficient enough. So we need to be serious about our future plan for the environment and climate cooperation with North Korea. Within the framework of the inter-Korean cooperation, we should create a package. A plan should be in place. And within the plan, there should be engagement from North Korea, engagement from the international institutions, so that we can collaborate together. Second, once we have the plan, what matters is implementation. To do the implementation, where is the funding source? Inter-Korean Development Fund can be expanded. International fund can be flown into the implementation of the project. Third, the green détente should have a good governance between the two Koreas, between Korea and the international community. There should be a good governance for green détente.
결국은 뭐 북한의 기후 변화나 환경 문제 자체에
Next,
체계적인
for the climate change, North Korea should lay a systematic foundation. To do that, they should collect the data. Data should be collected to understand the situation in North Korea and to extract the insight out of that data, and we need to find out what kind of support should be provided to North Korea.
인재 양성 사업도 우리가 좀 관심을 갖고 해야 된다.
Next one is nurturing talented resources.
계획들은 발표했지.
North Korea came up with economic plans, but they were not able to work on the plan because there is no one who can work on it.
기후 변화 환경
Because they do not have talented people who have experience in implementing those great ideas. So, nurturing talented resources can be one of the top priorities. Probably the Korean government can provide some support in doing that.
결국은 정부와 공공의 역할도 중요하지만 민간
Last but
기업의
not least, the role of the private sector is also important,
대탁트와 같이
especially for the green détente.
한국 기업이 가지고 있는
The Korean companies have digital technology and green technologies. That kind of technical prowess
나가신 기업들이 꽤 많거든요.
can be really helpful.
저는 조금 적극적으로
I believe those companies in the private sector should be able to develop those business scenarios and expand those businesses.
스타트업들이 같이 연계해서
And
이런 비즈니스를
we can have a joint venture between the North Korean people and Korean startups. It can be something beyond the green détente, and it can be a driving force for the economic collaboration between North Korea and South Korea. That's it from me.
감사합니다.
네, 조병현 소장님 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cho. And we'll turn to the next panelist, Mr. Choi Kwang-seok from Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation. Good afternoon.
두 번째 토론자로 지금
I'm the second panelist,
제로 2050 기후재단의
and my name is Choi Kwang-seok from Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation. Today's presentation was very meaningful,
오늘 주제 발표해 주신
and two speakers made very important presentations in regards to this.
제가 이제 기후재단에서
Since I'm working in the private climate-related organization, I would like to talk about some points related to the green détente. Then it would expand the scope of the discussion.
말씀드리고자 합니다.
So let me begin my comment.
기존의 남북 협력의
First, previously, the main players in the inter-Korean cooperation was the government.
사실 이제 그린 détente라는
As a matter of fact, the green détente was the term coined in the Park Geun-hye administration, and it was initiated at the time. But the inter-Korean cooperation, in particular in the forestry area, was initiated in the previous Moon Jae-in administration.
정상회담 때
During the inter-Korean summit, there was a discussion over the forestry cooperation. In the process, the forestry cooperation should be implemented in detail. So when we look at the detailed plan, for example, there is an inter-Korean cooperation center that can be built in Paju or Cheolwon. Then there can be the nursery for the future. It is not just about the cooperation for the forestry, it is also for the climate change responses. And current Yoon Suk-yeol administration also included this forestry issue in his 120 national agenda after the inauguration. For example, to respond to the natural disaster, inter-Korean government will respond together, and for the water and the forestry resources, the government provided clear vision. In this sense, the presentation of Professor Lee Yoo-gyun made very clear that there are three pillars: water, food, and energy. And this inter-Korean cooperation is very important strategy and direction, I believe.
이러한 많은 논의들이
Against this backdrop, even though there are many talks,
강태가 지속되고 있는 과정에서
currently the inter-Korean cooperation is in stalemate. Then how can we find a breakthrough?
이제는 남북 협력에서 특히
First, in the inter-Korean cooperation, in particular in the climate cooperation, not just the government but also the private sector needs to play a role.
기술은
President Lee
남북 간의 협력
mentioned that technology should be cooperated between the two Koreas and the restoration should be done internationally. It means instead of the nations in the world, NGOs
사회에서 기후 문제를 해결하는 데 많은
and
역할을 했던 그러한
many other
단체들의 역할이
private
있었고 그들의
organizations played a very important role until now. That's why now the world has the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And our foundation was also established for that purpose.
정부라든지
In that sense,
할 수 없는 그러한
we would like to
할 수 있는 일들을 정의를 하고
define the activities we can do in the area where the government cannot play.
연구과제를 발표하는
And we are promoting our research areas and we also do a lot of activities. So when it comes to the Green Détente,
저희 같은
on top of the international cooperation, I believe there should be clear roles of the NGOs. And when the government comes up with
적극적으로
plans, we should encourage the activities and participation of NGOs.
성과를 내지 않을
Then the outcome would be better.
예를 들어서
Let me give you an example.
협력에서 현재는
In the Inter-Korea Forestry Cooperation, currently the main player is the Korea Forest Service, and they are creating the nursery. However, in our foundation,
산불을 복원하기 위한 그런 육묘장의 건설이라든지
when we build the nursery for the reforestation of the Kosong where there was a wildfire,
것이 아니라 항상 그분들과 더불어서
and
북한의 황폐한
we are not just thinking about the Kosong, we also think about
산들을 같이
North Korea at the same time, and we are making proposals for a nursery. So constructing the nursery
북한의 그 협력 자체가
can facilitate the inter-Korean cooperation, even though the inter-Korean cooperation is in stalemate. But in the future, the nursery can play an important role. There should be more ideas, but small activities can be initiated by NGOs. Then
작은 블락들을 쌓는
I believe the NGOs can lay the
두
ground.
번째로는
Second,
저희가 남북 그린 대땅 기후 협력에서
in
지역적인
green cooperation and green détente,
생각이 듭니다.
I believe we need to expand the scope of the region.
북한의 문제를 볼 때는 항상
In other words, when we talk about inter-Korean cooperation, we always think about the Korean Peninsula, the DPRK and RK. When it comes to the water cooperation or forestry cooperation and climate cooperation, we limit the scope to the Korean Peninsula.
협력이라는 주제는
But this climate cooperation
특히 중위권 오늘 교수님 말씀하신 그런 지역 전체를
is more than that. We need to think about the entire mid-latitude region. So I believe that we need to think about not just the Korean Peninsula, but also
중국까지 아우르는
the surrounding area, including the Yellow Sea and China.
저희가 기후 협력의 문제를 얘기할 때는
So when we think about the climate cooperation, it is not just about the inter-Korean cooperation.
이러한 남북
China, the US, DPRK and RK, all these players need to work together. So in the international society,
한황이라는 또 한황의 중심에
we need to work on the climate cooperation
확대된다면은
in the larger scope, including the Yellow Sea and China.
만들지 않을까 생각이
Then there would be more options.
기후 협력
So we should not limit ourselves to the Korean Peninsula.
할 수 있는 옵션들이 많아 보이지 않는 것 같습니다.
Because if we limit ourselves, then there are not many options we can use.
이렇게 넓혔을 때 저희가
Once we expand the scope of area,
산림 협력만 보여주고
the area for cooperation is not just for forestry. When we think about the Yellow Sea, there is a mud flat that is extended from the South Sea of Korean Peninsula to North Korea. So in order to restore the mud flat,
그러한 노력들과
we are making many efforts on the Yellow Sea, and we are also making efforts to restore the biodiversity in the mud flat.
유사한 프로젝트를
So the projects we are doing in South Korea can be replicated in North Korea as well.
기후 협력의 문제를 놓고 봤을 때 좀더
So in
파괴라는 개념으로 보면
climate change cooperation,
갯벌의 생태를
we can expand the cooperation scope,
라는 그러한
for example, to the mud flat.
있었으면 하는 게
So I
저희 재단이
want you to expand the horizon.
많은 노력들을 하고 있습니다.
And for that, our foundation is making lots of efforts.
그 남북한
Last but not least,
협력이
the green détente
현재 교착 상태
and green cooperation between the two Koreas is not just for the inter-Korean cooperation.
산림 협력을 통한 그 NDC의
Through the forestry
그러한 안들이
cooperation,
있습니다.
there was an agreed
남북
NDC.
기후 협력이나 산림 협력에서 이제는
Now
온실가스 감축을 통한 그 레드 플러스
we need to expand this
우리나라의 NDC 달성을 하기 위한
to the Red Plus.
연결할 수 있잖아요.
And we can also link this to the NDC of Korea.
잠시 참석하기 전 오늘을 위해서 자료를 잠깐 찾아봤습니다.
For this meeting, I looked up the papers, and
300만 톤 정도
about 33 million tons of the carbon is reduced outside of the Korea for
초에 나온
the NDC of Korea. And when we look at the data from the Korean Institute,
대한 분석을 아주 자세하게 하시는
there was a detailed analysis report
보면은
for the Red Plus.
적정 시나리오를 봤을 때
And when we look at the appropriate scenario
을 통한 감축량
through the forestry projects in North Korea, we can reduce 2 million tons, and the maximum level is about 80 million tons.
300만 톤
Currently, 33 million tons of the carbon is reduced outside of Korean Peninsula. So if we implement the project in North Korea, then
때문에 좀 더 적극적인 노력
we can reduce the further carbon emissions.
오늘 요 자리에서
So in this occasion,
말씀드리고자 하는 거를 정리를 하면
if I summarize what I wanted to tell you, first, in green détente, there should be bigger role played by the private sector, and the government should come up with measures for that.
지역적인 관점에서
Second, at the regional level, not just the Korean Peninsula, but also in East Asian region, we need to
다양하게 가져갈 수 있지 않을까.
come up with more options for green détente. And last but not least,
해외 온실가스 감축분과 그다음에 남북한 산림 협력을 통한 감축
we can reduce the carbon dioxide outside of Korean Peninsula, and we can also reduce carbon emissions by doing the forestry project in North Korea. So we can implement this.
네, 최광수 사무총장.
Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you. I hope that Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation can contribute to more. Last but not least, I have Dr. Sujang Kim.
네, 안녕하십니까. 방금 소개받은
Good afternoon. I am Kim Soo-jung, who is working for the Korean Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade.
상태가 좀 많이 안 좋아서요.
Please understand that.
목 상태가 좀 많이 안 좋지만 좀 양해
Please understand that my voice is not that clear today.
발표 그리고 우리 국태시 김일의 부원장님.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you, Mukeshi Kimire. Thank you very much.
국태시 김일의 부원장님 발표
especially Assistant Director Mukeshi Kimire's presentation showed us what he was going through, especially how the GCF has been utilized. He shared his experiences as a recipient country. Nepal has some experiences, and he also shared the international development cooperation from the recipient country's viewpoint, and how North Korea can utilize the GCF, and how North Korea can be engaged in the multilateral cooperation. I sincerely hope that we can have more engagement with you and we can study more. And I was impressed by the presentation from Professor Lee. Professor Lee talked about the climate and environment model customized to the Korean Peninsula. It can be applicable to the inter-Korean cooperation, and it can be one of the key cooperation model for the Korean ODA, and we can create a Korean type development cooperation model. Korea is doing lots of activities and coming up with various strategies to advance the international development cooperation. And we have lots of meetings about the international development cooperation. In the early next year, we're going to review the previous year and come up with a new plan for the international development cooperation. I believe the Korean type climate model can be discussed under the framework of the international development cooperation. The cooperation we have between South Korea and North Korea can be one of the proof for the better international development cooperation of South Korea, and we can expand the ODA of South Korea. So we can replicate the inter-Korean cooperation into the globe. The reason we are gathered here today is to talk about the green détente between the two Koreas. I would say the green détente is a great vision and great idea. We want to have peace and prosperity. To achieve peace and prosperity, there can be various tools and mechanisms. However, it is really difficult to fully utilize those tools and mechanisms. However, the greenness and the green détente can be a really wonderful topic. So, there is a global climate change. And in Korea, we are suffering from natural disasters. And we need to enhance our response to natural disaster. So, green is the key word that can be sympathetic to South Korea and North Korea. And green can be one of the effective tools to bring about peace on the Korean Peninsula. So I would say green détente can be a great item for the cooperation. However, if we accept the word green as a mechanism or the tool, that can be misleading. The greenness or the eco-friendliness should be our goal, not just the tools. In green détente, as Professor Lee said, we can have some forestry-related cooperation. There is a high demand from North Korea, and North Korea forestry situation needs some emergent action and immediate action. We can simply talk about the humanitarian support, and even the humanitarian support can be exempted from the sanction. So people only talk about the humanitarian support and humanitarian aid, but sometimes we forget about the link to the climate change. We have some humanitarian support within the framework of the climate change. So we can start the humanitarian support under the framework of the climate change or the forestry support. And there are many climate items that we can do under the idea or under the umbrella of the humanitarian support. For example, productivity enhancement in the agriculture or better safety in their residence systems. Those are the collaboration and the cooperation areas for the future green détente. In the mid and the long term, it is not just about enhancing the environment. The green détente should be a facilitator to make the industry more eco-friendly. It is not just about the land usage or the water management. North Korea should be working on green transition. Their industry should become greener so that they can work on the mitigation, not just adaptation. Once we are working on the green détente, probably we will provide grants. However, grants is not sustainable and impact is not wide enough. So North Korea internally should build their capability. That means technical transfer, technical training, education, and the talented resource training is really necessary. Mr. Cho talked about nurturing talented resources, and we need talented resources in 3 areas. First, industry. In the industry, there must be talented resources who can take care of the eco-friendly devices and work on the green devices. And in the science sector, we need climate experts. Also, we should nurture climate policy experts. Nurturing talent is very complicated, so we should have a firm plan. Mr. Cho also talked about building the data. The basic foundation for climate action is the data, and we should start collecting the data immediately. I have many things to say, but in a nutshell, the green détente should be started here right now on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sujong Kim, thank you very much. Since you're an expert, I believe your comment is very realistic. We had a panel discussion, and before we return to the presenters, we would like to accommodate some questions from the offline participants as well as online participants. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. And those joining online can ask a question. Please post your question to the link. We have 2 presenters, so you can make a comment on the panel discussion. So I will summarize the panel discussion. First question to Professor Lee is, you mentioned 5 proposals or suggestions, and you also mentioned the efficient use of energy is very important for sustainability in the long term. So in that sense, how we can include the efficiency of energy in the projects. Please make a comment on that. And second, I would like to ask a question to Dr. Mukesh Kimire. Along with the energy and climate issue, in the developing countries, SOC investment is very important. Once you have the infrastructure, you can respond to the climate change, and you can also achieve the green targets. In that sense, what should be the right direction for the improvement of the infrastructure or SOC so that we can have a favorable condition for green détente? So that is my question to you. And if there is any question in the floor, we would like to accommodate that. Otherwise, we will turn to the presenters. So first, Professor Lee, please go ahead. Thank you very much.
효율화에 대해서 제가 정확히
When it comes to the efficient use of energy, I'm not sure what is the exact meaning,
이해하는 상태로
but I would like to give you the answer based on my understanding.
기본적으로 다 아시고 계시는 건데
I believe you
국제협력에서는
understand this. In the international cooperation, first, you need to consider the current situation of the beneficiary countries, and based on the supply of resources, we need to work on the cooperation. That is very basic. And when it comes to the DPRK, the situation is totally different from South Korea. And in terms of the energy,
신재생이라든지 뭐 다른 그 에너지의 첨단이
we use advanced technologies and green energy.
에너지 기술이
But I believe we need to provide the energy technology suitable for the DPRK. I cannot say what is the right level, but when it comes to the renewable energy,
말씀드린 그 지역 단위의 또는 유역 단위의
the regional level or watershed level environment management is required.
그런 걸 견지하고 말씀을 드리면 그곳에 어느 지역에
Based on that assumption,
넣을 것인지를 봐야 돼요.
in which region what energy source will be provided is important.
그 에너지 그
So in the entire area of North Korea, there should be a master plan for energy supply. And under the master plan, we can implement a project and we can specify what energy source will be used in each region.
그것이 에너지의 효율화 또는 반대로 말씀
Based on that, we can also pursue the energy efficiency. In other words, that plan can minimize the mistakes.
말씀해 주셨습니다만
As Dr. Soo-jung Kim said,
에서는 뭐 시간상 그냥 넘어갔는데
and I skipped
기술 협력
in my presentation, in the technological cooperation, the most important part is having consensus.
자료를 공동으로 확보하고
So first, we need to have the common data and understand
여러 가지
each other and on the same page.
공동
First, we need to understand the land. To understand the land situation, there should be the joint research team or joint survey team, and the survey team will do the investigation, gather the data, and reach a consensus. And then we can understand what kind of energy will be required in which region.
그리고 두 번째는
Second,
우리가 해외 그 ODA 사업을 많이 하는데
we perform many ODA projects in many other countries, and people usually think that we don't need any ODA project in Korea. As I mentioned, we have 92% of population in 17% of land area. So in this 17% of area, there is enough infrastructure for energy and water and food. And there is excellent infrastructure for import and export. However, on the contrary, we are not fully utilizing the 83% of the land area.
우리가 ODA 사업
Maybe this is a personal opinion, but we don't have enough infrastructure for those areas. So we are performing the PPP projects in many other countries, but we are not doing these PPP projects in Korea.
전문가들이 저희를 협력의 파트너를 이해를 해줄지
If we continue this situation, then North Korean experts will not trust us. So when it comes to the energy, I believe
지역 중심으로 중요하다.
we need to implement the PPP projects in local regions.
적지적소에
Simply put,
해야 되는데 그거를 위해서
we need to
공동
implement projects in appropriate area. For example, we need to do the joint research.
교수님 감사합니다. 네, 무케시
Thank you, Professor Lee. Mr. Mukesh Kimire.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator, for your question. Yeah, especially related to this, as you rightly mentioned, this, of course, this to deal with these climate issues, we need the lots of infrastructures. So the role of the infrastructure, I think, is very important. So I think you also asked about this, what should be the right direction or the way to deal with these energy-related infrastructures. So actually, in my opinion, it's not, there is no direct way out or this direct solutions to recommend directly, or there is no hard and fast rule to go with certain direction. But in my opinion, what I think is basically, first thing is there needs to be a kind of this enabling environment to the stakeholders, not only with the government, because we already discussed about the role of the NGO, role of the private sectors. So I think the foremost important thing from the government side is there should be a enabling environment to the stakeholders, so that they will be much more confident among the stakeholders, so that the infrastructures can be developed very quickly. And second thing, with this attracting with this global climate funds and this international development cooperation. So I think what from my experience point of, especially working with this World Bank, ADB, and other developing banks, so they basically see this transparency of the government and the transparency of the system, and also this commitment from the government, because if there is some problem, some issues that needs to be dealt from the government level. So especially working with these international development funds like ADB, World Bank, and also even with the Green Climate Fund. So the transparency in the government system and the commitment from the government sector is there should be these things. And in terms of this implementation side, I think, of course, this policy, like I already mentioned, this enabling environment that needs certain policy directions from the government. And as we already discussed about this technology promotion and technology cooperation between the countries, then that should be the second one. And in terms of the implementation, I think this transparency and this commitment from the project implementers also should be there. So as I already mentioned, so there is no directly the prescribed solutions for any of the countries. But I think based on my experience, I think this should be the basic minimum for this infrastructure development related to this climate change and energy. So thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
이 섹션이 가지고 있는
Today, the title of this session is Green Détente. So there was in-depth presentations, discussions, and Q&A session.
섹션을 주관하시고
The session was organized
에 대해서 준비를 해주신
and the data was collected by the Net Zero 2050 Climate Foundation. So I would like to extend my appreciation. And on top of this session, after that, I believe there are many plans you have. So what is the future direction, or what is the expected effect? Then can you introduce them? Well, our foundation was established last year
탄소 중립이나
for carbon neutrality and climate change related agenda at the private level.
하지 못한다기보다는 정부의 손이 다 가지 않는 그런 의미에서
There are many areas where government is not reaching. So
협력 모델
domestically and internationally, we are promoting cooperative models.
이 그린 대땅트 이 통일부
Today, we are organizing this Green Détente seminar,
올해 이제 2차
and actually it was held last year, and this is the second rendition.
큰 얘기라고 올해는
And last year, we talked very big topics, and this year,
해주셔서
the professor suggested 5 important topics, so it was very meaningful.
남북한의
And
협력과 또 동북아 그린 동북아 구상이라는 그런
This year,
재단의 큰 테마를
we
가지고
have a big theme, the inter-Korean cooperation and cooperation in East Asia. So in Saemangeum area,
관계자 그러니까 교수님들이나 학자분들하고
together with many scholars and professors, we are going to hold another seminar. And in October,
현실적으로 산림이란 부분
we will focus on forestry among other topics we discussed today.
이란 포럼
And we will hold another forum.
오늘 참석하신 우리 뭐야 발제자 그다음에 토론
Today we had presenters and panelists. So I would like to ask for your interest in the following seminars and forum. And I also would like to
또 다른
ask your interest among the online and offline participants. And if please provide your support and interest to the following sessions. Thank you very much, Secretary General. As you mentioned, Korea is a country with a big forest, and we've been sharing the forestry supporting programs. And in the future, I believe the role played by the Zero Net 2050 Climate Foundation will be very important. And if we implement these projects efficiently, then we can expect big change. So I believe the presentation and discussion was very informative and useful. And I would like to conclude the session with a big round of applause.